Hey guys, it's Vincent with Vascotoys. On today's episode of Action VASCO, I'm going to show you this terrain diorama, which I made to work with all different lines of figures. Star Wars, Dragon Ball Z, Mythic Legions, Legends, you name it. If it can go in terrain, you can use this dio for it.
Vascotoys, action figure dioramas and props.
Okay, let's start out with the dimensions as we always do. This diorama is 24 inches wide. It is 16.5 inches deep, and it's 10 inches tall to its highest point. Now, the cool thing about this dio is that this was made entirely of scraps that I had from other projects. Some of them were bigger scraps, some of them were smaller, but as I've said before, when you keep your scraps, especially for things like rubble, it's really great to have those things because they would otherwise probably be not easy to use in projects. And here, where you're really doing a free-form kind of dio when you do a terrain dio, you can really maximize the use of those things. So I don't know if I can show you guys, maybe I'll show you in another shot, but the base looks like it's one piece. It's actually like 6 or 7 different pieces that are sort of molded together and held together with glue and some other things. But essentially you have 3 parts. You got the base, you have this canyon wall, if you will, and this canyon wall, and everything is completely permanent because I wanted to be able to give the illusion of rocks and sand and sediment kind of along the edges, and that would have been really difficult for me to do had this not been a permanent dio. So what I want to do next is show you guys some of the materials that we use to achieve some of the rubble and fine sand texture that you see along the dio. So if you guys are wondering how I got some of the grain for this, because I usually texture the foam with a tin foil ball, which I did do with this, but you can't get the additive kind of texture that I got here doing that. So what this ended up being was basically playsand that you would get from the store that you put in like your kid's sandbox. This is all kind of just scattered throughout the terrain, and I used a sifter to kind of work out the grains because there's different grain sizes that come in playsand, believe it or not. And when you do that, sort of just Mod Podged, put a layer of Mod Podge down where I wanted the sand to cover, and then after I put the sand down, I did my old Mod Podge water solution, which I'll link to a video that shows that whole process with flocking so that you guys can apply it to this. So that was the more fine grains that you see here. And then there's another component that you'll see, which is actually aquarium rocks from like a fish tank aquarium that is all throughout the piece that you see here. And you can get a box or a bag of these for, I don't know, $5, $6, $7. And I've only bought one in the 4 years I've been doing dio building, and it's lasted me a very long time. So in addition to the foam and the paint, the only other 2 things that I used really were the sand and some of the aquarium rocks. I mentioned before that this is a conglomeration of a bunch of scraps, so I want to show you guys the only part of this dio that's not finished at the moment is the bottom part. So I can really show you what I mean by this is sort of a Frankenstein looking diorama. We have one large piece and then a bunch of smaller pieces, some of which even have brickwork on them. So for example, this was a cutout from a window on a dio that I did a brick building where I cut the window out and I put a 3D printed window in, but I made the bricks first to make sure it was believable, and then I popped it out. And then so for this dio, I knew I wanted to make a bigger piece than this large piece that I had, and I didn't want to waste a completely new 2x2 piece. So I went ahead and just started putting these things in together, and I hot glued them. What you could do if you wanted to is just to give some extra stability, but it will also add weight. You could spackle in between all of these. You could wall spackle to really add solidity to the structure. But I think that doing the glue so far is pretty good, especially when you consider on the other side of it, we've got hot glue at play, we have Mod Podge, we have glue solution, we have sand, we have, which really it's sand, but it almost turns into like a cement type solution after it solidifies from the whole process of using the Mod Podge liquid. So I think that it works out really well like this, and I'm glad I got to use these pieces because I really don't think I would have used them for anything else. So I want to show you guys some of the rock work that's going on here. So I have a couple of different things going on with this side of the diorama, and this really applies to this side and the left side as well. I really didn't want this to necessarily look like Dragon Ball Z style rocks because I wanted to be able to use this with multiple franchises, so Mythic Legion, Star Wars, other things like that, where you could put a figure in a terrain piece. So I wanted it to look like more realistic, if you will. And then on the outside though, I did decide that I wanted to go with more of a Dragon Ball Z look. So in my mind, the coloring of this diorama, you could use this as a Namek diorama, you could use it in a earth setting, but you know, it really kind of depends on the backdrop you use. But here you've got more of these larger kind of obelisk shaped pieces of rock, whereas in the inside it's really more of like how you might see rock formations in the real world, so to speak. But I think it's a nice balance between the two, and you'll see it here, and then I'll also spin it around. You see it on the backs, and it's also on this side on the outside. It also really makes for a very I thought easier solution to get some rock features on the outside of a wall that didn't require me carving into the foam. It required me carving pieces and gluing it onto the foam. So more of an additive measure as opposed to carving directly into the foam. I want to talk to you quickly about the paint progression for this. So I base coated the entire diorama in this earth brown by Anita's, and I normally use Anita's paint, so that was the first one that I did. So this was completely brown to start out with. Then I did what's called a stippling technique with white, Anita's white, and apologies for the big container, but I always get white in a large container because I use a lot of it. So I used Anita's white, stippling all of the rocks and everything randomly. Then I used a combination of caramel and yellow, which I think this is canary yellow, to create like a yellowish color that I did the stippling technique again with to get more variation in the color. So that was the next phase. Then I took two different watered down versions of Desert Sand by Anita's and applied it to the entire diorama surface. And the first one I would say was a little bit more thick, the second one was more watered down. And finally I did some dry brushing of Rivera Tan, which is slightly lighter than Desert Sand, and then even after that was done, a little bit of dry brushing with the white from Anita's as well. Thanks everyone for watching this episode of Action VASCO, where we looked at this terrain diorama. Now if you guys liked the video, please subscribe to the channel so you can see all of the diorama tutorials, tips, and feature videos like this one that we're going to have coming up. Thanks everyone, we'll see you in the next episode.